people from different professions come into the classroom. And I forget what this profession was that this one father came in with, but it wasn't obviously very interesting because the kids all fell asleep, and he was following people that were doing things that were a lot more exciting. So I wish I could say, I was a NASA astronaut, and I flew to the moon, and I can tell you what it's like to be a Christian flying a mission to the moon, or maybe a football player, an NFL player who won a Super Bowl, as the Christian quarterback, but I was just a Christian in the public school system. And as I think about that, I think that's where God puts most of us. He puts us into regular situations. It's where he put his disciples. They were just regular people, and he put them into situations where he could work to make a difference in people's lives. So I felt like that's what he did with me. And so a little bit, just so you know a little bit more about what it was specifically, in 1989, I started working in public schools, and I worked for 31 years in the Sacramento City Unified School District. And all of those were in secondary school, so it was middle school and high school. I started in middle school. There was 1 year I worked in the Elk Grove District as a counselor, and I'll explain that a little bit more. And then 2 years, Lori and I went to Columbia, and we worked in a private international school. So that was really kind of different. And I want to tell you a little bit my background, because there's a reason why I went into public education. So you guys know about my family, so I thought, well, maybe I'd talk about I don't need to do that because you kind of know who my family is. So the question is, why did I enter public education in the first place? Especially with what we think about public education now. I mean, you hear anything good about it? I don't. So you think, well, are there any Christians in public education? Just Patty and I don't know. And so the truth is, unfortunately, the press we hear isn't very accurate. Certainly public education isn't perfect, but there are some really wonderful people in it, and they don't do it for the money. But I remember I've met a lot of just amazing teachers, and some bad ones too. I mean, there's a mix. But some really dedicated people, and Christians too, in public education. So just to let you know a little bit about my background and how I got there, some of you knew my father. He was a Presbyterian minister. And when I was young, I grew up then in a Christian family, so I can't really say there was a moment where, I accepted Christ. There was, but I kind of already knew him before that. And that really, that took me into my middle school years. Middle school years, I hit a depression. And so I'd been such a happy kid, and then all of a sudden I felt like I wanted to die. That was in my 8th grade year. I don't know what it was exactly, self-esteem. Maybe it was my physiological change, chemicals, I don't know. But for about a year, I was in this kind of distant place and was just feeling hopeless. But it's in that crisis moment in our lives that's when we lean on God and we meet him in a way that's much deeper than we would have met him. And so even though I was still a pretty young kid, I was only 13, I felt like I started to develop a relationship with God that was much deeper than my age would have generally allowed. Over the course of high school, the depression kind of dissipated. And so I came into my college years, and I really didn't have a lingering issue with that. And I started moving into kind of ministerial things. I don't know if at the time if I was thinking of being a pastor or not, but I just kind of did. I worked at Westminster Woods as a camp counselor for a couple of years. I was an intern at Fair Oaks Presbyterian, where I knew Jim from, and started getting interested in missions. So I went to Urbana, was a mission conference that InterVarsity put on, and some of you guys have been to it. I went to it a couple years in a row, or maybe it's 80 and 82 or something like that. Really stirred my interest in missions, and I already had an interest in culture. I'd done a lot of traveling. I'd been fortunate to go with my father to the Middle East. I'd been to Europe. I then actually, right after college, went to Europe and did a 2-month mission kind of experience. So I had an interest in that area. And so I started finding myself maybe moving into an interest in becoming a missionary. And one of my friends, one of my best friends, he was actually my best man, that's what they call him. Best man at my wedding, which I just saw. I went to Alaska and fished with him. He became a missionary and went to Nepal and India with Wycliffe for a career. And so it was that impactful, these kind of experiences. So I thought, well, that's maybe what I need to be doing, because I love the international scene. I just love culture, and I love God, and this makes sense. So I went to what's called the World Center of Missions in Pasadena. I don't know if it still exists. There were a lot of different mission agencies all together. I went there and I started exploring, and I just didn't find that thing. I was expecting that one country to really jump out at me. You know, how does God work? It's hard to know sometimes. But I was expecting this thing to happen and this magic, and God was going to say, you know, I want you to go to Sudan or whatever it was. I just didn't get that. And so it was a time of uncertainty, which eventually led to a sense that, you know, at the same time, my pastor, which was Mark Nazarian, I don't know if any of you ever knew him from Fair Oaks, but he was like a kind of a known Presbyterian. He was like, yeah, you should be a pastor, Dave, you should be, and I just didn't feel that. And so I came to this point where I felt like I was being called out of the church into the world. And I didn't want to be in a job where I felt like I needed the world to come to me. I wanted to be in the world. And public education seemed like a pretty good place to be. So there's this famous verse that you might know. It's called John 3:16. Remember that one? Yeah. For God so loved the world. He loved the world. He didn't just love all the good people. He loved the whole. And so if you think about Jesus' ministry, it was out and about in the world. I mean, he was certainly in synagogues, but he wasn't waiting for people. He went out and about. He talked to the rich, the poor, the Jews, the Samaritans, and the Gentiles too. He went to all of them, and he didn't wait for them. So public schools seemed like a good place in the world to serve God, to make a difference. And that's kind of what my mentality was when I first got there. Little did I know what I was getting into. The world mission field came to me because the schools I ended up at were in the south area of Sacramento, and it was like going to another country. In 2002, Time magazine, I don't know if you remember this article, cited research by the Civil Rights Project at Harvard, labels Sacramento the nation's most diverse city. Do you remember that? No. Sacramento was the nation's was called that. Yeah. By the way, it's more diverse now than it was then. Right. At that time, there were 41% white in Sacramento. Today, there's only 30. And the other minority groups have become less minority. And so, you know, things have really changed, and that's the world that Sacramento was. And then I went into the district that it was even more diverse. By the time I left my last high school, which was Kennedy, I wasn't going to say the name, but no, it was only 13% white. Okay, so it's a little different than Fremont. This is the world I worked in. It was not the world I came from. So this is the funny part. So I was like, well, how did God prepare me for this? I grew up in Visalia, which is a little valley town. At the time, it was about 35 to 50,000. And I was a middle class kid, and I went to school with a bunch of middle class people that were mostly white, and a few Hispanics, and then a very few Black and Asian students. Then I moved to Marin County, and there were even more white people. Then I came to Sacramento. I lived in Citrus Heights, which is not exactly a hub for diversity, or it used to not be. It's probably a little bit more today. So here I was. There's a problem. I don't really know anything about the inner city kid, and yet that's where I was heading. So again, I did have some things in my pocket that were helpful. One was I was really interested in culture. I majored in international relations in college. I had traveled quite a bit. I'd been on missions. And with all that, I felt a certain excitement about cultures. I wasn't one of those guys that was going to judge people. I was more like interested than I was wanting to stand in judgment. So anyway, here's the real question though. What did a very white, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, fairly innocent, small-town guy have to say to mostly low-income, street-smart, inner-city kids of color? That's the real question. How could I speak to their life situation? I mean, I hadn't lived that. Of course, we see people that have been addicts, and they can reach addicts for God, and different ways where we've kind of struggled, and then we find those people I hadn't been in this situation at all. So, how was I going to overcome that? And I think part of it was I felt like God put me there. So here's some of the things that I did, and some of them I grew into. I mean, I wouldn't say I had a list of things right away, because I didn't know what I was doing. So the first one was treating people with dignity. So I decided right away that the way I was going to relate to kids was treating them like an equal. Not that we were in equal roles. I had a different role than they had, but that in God's eyes we were the same. We're both human beings, and we're on this journey of life. They're just in an earlier stage. So I saw them also as made in God's image, valued. I didn't talk down to kids. Some teachers do that. So you see them that way. I didn't do that. I had a policy, even from the beginning with my kids, because I knew they were coming from really difficult places, that if they came to class and they just were they had something going on in their life that was going to disrupt the class, I just said, let me know before and I'll let you have, your space. Just, do the work, but I'm not going to call on you. I'm not going to put you on the spot. And I think that saved us from a lot of conflict. I learned that I never knew what was happening in a student's home life. I think that's one of the things that as teachers, when we treat a kid a certain way because they didn't follow the rule, then we find out later that something really horrible had begun. It makes you grieve. So I remember in one situation, one day, I found out, I guess the next day, I had a student sitting through my class that day. Found out the next day her father had died the day before, and she came to school the next day. So here she's sitting in my class, her father just passed away the day before. Stuff like that happens all the time, where really tragic things were going on in kids' lives, and I just didn't know. So other things, I tried to listen and understand. I tried to convince them, and I was for them. I tried to show an interest in them and what they were doing, caring for them, engaging with them. One of the main things was being fair. I think a lot of students felt like, well, teachers have their pets, and they're just not fair. And so in James, if you read the book of James, it says in James 2:1, my brothers and sisters, believers in our glorious Lord Jesus Christ, must not show favoritism. So I had a student in class one day, and this is a really common thing for teachers. Of course, he was talking. He wasn't supposed to be talking, so I got mad at him, and maybe I gave him detention or something like that. Anyway, later he told me, he said, you're not fair. He goes, you every time I talk, you get on me, but other people are talking too. And we've probably even all said that to a teacher at one point. But I thought about it too, and here as a young teacher, and I thought, well, I can see that. I mean, I got used to looking to him whenever there was talking going around over here, because he was the one doing it so much that I just put him into that box, right? So I told him, I said, look, I'm gonna try to really be fair with you. And so taking that same idea, I really tried to do that with all the kids. Try to treat them fairly, and they really respect that if you do that. And then doing all these, trying to build relationship with them. Eventually I became a counselor, partly because I liked relationship better than I liked the academic part. And this is my first 4 years, but one of the years I coached basketball partly for that reason. And I was the boys coach and the girls coach the same year. And I'd only played 1 year of high school basketball, so I wasn't that good, but I did that. So I want to tell you a few stories about building relationships. And this isn't to say, I don't want you to think, oh, Dave thinks he's so great, because I don't, and I didn't always do this well, but sometimes I did. There was a student named Reuben, and he was an African-American young man, but he wasn't like street tough. He was a little too soft for the situation, really. And he probably got pushed around and bullied a little bit. He liked to hang out in my room, and at lunchtime after school, you can kind of imagine that. And so I got to know him. We kind of became, friends. And it was a time when it was still okay for a teacher to drive a kid somewhere. I mean, I never did that later in my career, but at the time it was like, we didn't think about those things. So I drove him home one day, and he was from a very poor family. I think he lived with his mother and his grandfather. And he invited me into his house, and it was, disarray. It was not a good situation. I think he was very neglected. That's one of the reasons he stayed with me after school at lunch sometimes. Anyway, so I go in and I'm in this house, and his grandfather comes out and he greets me. I think he's got dementia of some sort, but he proceeds to pull down his pants and just and urinate right there on the floor in front of me. And I thought, and the boy was so ashamed and embarrassed. And I thought, wow, this is the kind of world he's in.
Yeah.
So somehow he and I know we talked, and he said, I love baseball. I'd really love to have a mitt, but my mom, they can't afford it. They won't give me a mitt. So I was able to get him a baseball glove. And so end of that story then. Now about 20 years later, I'm sitting in my office at Kennedy one day. I get a phone call from a kid. His name's Reuben. And he says, "Do you remember me? I was in your class way back when." And I said, "You know what? I remember you. I don't remember everybody, but I remember you." And he said, "I just want you to know how much that meant to me. That, being my friend, taking care of me, guiding me, buying me a baseball mitt." And he goes, "I just want you to know that I'm married now. I have a good job. I live in Hawaii. I'm doing well. And I just thought it was important for you to know that." And that, that's the kind of thing as educators, we never see hardly, right, the end of the story. But it was so powerful, and I was just so happy for him. And it reminded me that a little compassion can go a long way with the right person. I also had some other, stories that were kind of similar, but I had a story, a boy named Chris, who I always thought of, he was like the prototype for the slow learner, but he just trudged ahead. He would get every assignment done, and so as years went past, after I had him in class, I used to use him as an example and say, you can do it, because I had this kid named Chris once, and he got a C in my class because he just, he didn't give up. He kept, working at it. Anyway, I also took Chris home one day. So he was, and I knew him actually through middle school, and then when I went to Kennedy, he went there too. And I think this was when he was at Kennedy. And I can't remember why I took him. But I took him home, went into his house, just crazy chaos. Bunch of people on the sofa, parents I think too, watching TV in the middle of the day. And we go into the kitchen, and it's just the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. Food from who knows when on dishes from who knows when, just all over the counters and all that. So I thought, well, this is a chance for me to teach him about hygiene. So I said, let's wash the dishes together. I want to teach you. You don't have to live like this. There's a better way to do it. So we're starting to organize the mess, and I lift up the dish. What's it called? Dish drain. The little you put the dishes on, and just cockroaches everywhere. Just. And I'm just like, oh my gosh. And this is what our kids were.
Yeah.
Some kids were living like. You just don't know.
No.
I had another kid who was a Russian kid. I went to his house one day, and I don't think he was with me, but I just went for a visit. And there were like 15 people living in one 3-bedroom house. His room was like a tree house out in the backyard. He and his brother slept on this flat that they had created for them. There was another time when Lori and I went to I had this Hmong family. A lot of Hmong kids were at Kennedy at the time, and they still are. And if you know anything about the Hmong, they're not really very appreciated by the Southeast Asian community. They were like the lowest. The Vietnamese kind of looked down at them. They were the mountain people. But anyway, this Hmong family, they didn't often do super well in school. Had a bunch of kids. Again, we went to their house, and they had kids living all over in the living room. They lived on the sofas, and except for the son, he got like a room all by himself because in that culture, that's you just do that. But we went there, and it was funny. We decided to bring him a turkey. I think it was Christmas or Thanksgiving. I don't remember. Was it Thanksgiving? Okay. And we couldn't go in right away because they had a shaman that had come over and was like blessing the door, all the lintels over the doors, because the son was getting into gangs and stuff. And they thought that maybe, there was some kind of a curse on him. But just an FYI, these kids, they were amazing. The two girls, the oldest girls, both went to Berkeley. Then they moved because the son's involvement in gangs. And the daughter that I knew her, but I think she was maybe a freshman at the time. She went to Stanford. So here's this family. They've got these amazing kids, except for the son. I don't know what happened to him. So again, just to, we get involved with people like this. There was a student at Lori's School Choices just last spring. So I was over there for a few months. And he was from Afghanistan, and he'd moved over as a younger man, so he's still, I guess you'd call him a first generation, because he had been born there and came here. He'd been expelled from his last school, I found out, because he got involved in a fight and pulled out a knife. And he wanted to go back there, but it wasn't working out. So I just was trying to encourage him, just help him to believe in himself, hey, that you could, improve. And then so one day he comes in, and he's been doing better. His grades have been coming up, and he goes, I just want to know what my GPA is right now to find out, show my parents or whatever. So I go, well, you know how to figure out your GPA? He goes, well, no, I don't have to do it. So I showed him how to figure out a GPA. And he had this look on his face like he had climbed Mount Everest or something like that. I mean, like he'd achieved the greatest thing. It was a 2.6. And he was like, oh my gosh, my parents are going to be so excited. They've never seen anything like this. So I'm like, okay, great, that's awesome. So anyway, it was a neat moment to just see his excitement. He came back to me though, because I was only there for a few months, and the last week I was there, he came back to see me, and he actually had some tears in his eyes with you're leaving, and I mean, thank you so much, and I just feel like I hadn't done that much for him. But again, kids that have a lot of need, they really appreciate anything, they don't get it. They're not getting that kind of tenderness, and so when you give them a little bit, I'm sure you heard stories from Claire on that too, huh? Yeah. And so in the end, it's like I had this gap, but love bridged the gap. Love bridges cultural gaps. It doesn't matter what color, even how old I am. Sometimes I think, well, I'm old. Kids aren't going to be able to relate to me. It's not true. If you love kids and you treat them with dignity, they'll relate to you. So anyway, the longer I worked with low-income students, the better I understood their world and how to empathize and love them. Love translates well in any culture. Why shouldn't it? It is at the core of God himself, right? Mm-hmm. And what links us to him. What's amazing is that my students mostly accepted me and loved me back. That's the part that's amazing. So, not saying there weren't challenges, so I'll tell you about a few of those. So let's call it the learning curve, and it was very large for me these first 4 years. So I'm in Meadowview at one of the lowest performing schools in the district. Might have been the lowest, I don't know. Tough part of town. Street gang just down the street called the Detroit Bloods. So you're in this neighborhood where nobody believes that they can do anything. Nothing good's going to happen. Their lives are heading down. So some things that happened, just so you know what it was like. One day I'm on campus, in between classes, I'm walking around, I see this boy on a bicycle. He's not supposed to be here. I didn't know who he was, but he wasn't one of our students. I went up to him, tried to get him to leave the campus nicely, and after he punched me twice in the face, then he left. And but the truth was, I found out later, he'd run away from home. He was there to get some clothes for his brother. And so, he was in a difficult place, and you just have to know that you're dealing with those kind of kids. Another time, I'm out there at lunchtime, I'm right in front of the office, and this big girl fight breaks out with two big girls, probably almost my size. And so I was the only one there, and they don't really train us, to break up fights or anything like that. So a lot of educators get hurt because they get involved in things that they haven't been trained what to do. So I grabbed the girl, I took one girl, I pushed her away, I grabbed the other girl, I was younger, I was stronger, and I pinned her arms at her side, and I just picked her up, and I carried her over to the office, and then took care of that. I was done, went back to my room, and I'm unlocking the door, and kids are coming in, and the kids are like, Mr. Drotts, how come you're here? And I'm like, what? And we thought you got stabbed. And I go, what? What do you mean? You go, yeah, when you grabbed that girl, the other girl went and grabbed a knife out of her backpack, and she came to stab you or the other girl. But then, so-and-so, I can't remember his name, tackled her before she stabbed us. But to the kids, it looked like maybe I got stabbed, so it was that close. You know that, right? Yeah.
All you do.
And what's amazing about that story is the boy who did that, who tackled her, was one of my most difficult students. Oh. Just a difficult kid. He was in trouble all the time. And yet, he saved my life. I don't know. Oh. But that's the kind of world we were in. In that same school, one day I'm having a conversation with a couple girls. They're 13 or 14, and they're telling me how they want to have babies, soon. I'm like, what? this is the point where my mind is still getting blown by kids, because it's like, I didn't know this world existed, And so I said, well, why would you want to do that? And they said, to have somebody that I can love and someone that would love me. And some of you are like, yeah, I've heard that before. That was new to me at the time. Then, regarding a lot of the boys, so, of course we're talking to kids about, your future, and, maybe you can go to college, and all these things that we would tell our kids, right? And they're looking at you like, what are you talking about? I'm going to be dead probably by the time I'm 21 or 22 anyway. What's the point? And it's because a lot of them had lost brothers and sisters and cousins and uncles, drive-by shootings, that thing. We're not hearing about that so much now, but that was really common back then, and that was a neighborhood where things like that happened. And even though I'd be like, really? Has it happened that much? It happened enough that they didn't really believe they had a future. So it was another world, but a place where God needed to be and seen and heard. I mean, this was a mission field here. And as we know, secondary education, that time of life for us, is one of the most difficult times of our lives. I'm sure we could all go around in a circle and talk about, oh yeah, this is what was really, difficult for me. Might have been peer pressure, bullying, parental issues, neglect, low self-worth, academic challenges, learning disabilities, depression, anxiety, loneliness, identity crisis, academic pressure. And there's all this stuff going on in that window of time. And these kids, and at least a lot of us, maybe not all of us, had family there to kind of guide us. A lot of these kids really didn't. Mother Teresa, I've got a couple of quotes from her. She's a good one to quote, Mother Teresa. How can you go wrong? She said, the biggest disease today, which was, it's probably like 20 years ago now, isn't leprosy or tuberculosis, but a feeling of being unwanted. And then she adds in another quote, the most terrible poverty is loneliness and the feeling of being unloved. Even the world knows it needs love. It's not just Christians where we know about love, but the world. And, I have to quote a song or two here, because that's what I do usually. The Beatles, all you need is love, right? Yeah. What the world needs now is love, sweet love. You remember who wrote that song? Yeah. Burt Bacharach, right? That's a name you don't hear every day. And we, Christians, we sing songs like, love, 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 Christians, this is your call, love your neighbor as yourself, for God loves all. And they'll know we are Christians by our love. Actually, I decided that would be the title of this talk. They'll know we are Christians by our love. So what was God's mission for me in the public schools? Here's what Mother Teresa said about that. I like this. Spread love everywhere you go. Let no one come to you without leaving happier. And that kind of, I didn't know that Mother Teresa said that until I started doing this. But that was kind of my mission statement anyway. I wrote this. One of my goals was to love and serve people beyond what they expected, to encourage and add hope and joy. So that was one of my thrills, even as a counselor too. I really tried to do this, is give people better service than they even thought they could get. Treat them that well. Jesus said, let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify your Father in heaven. So that was, again, that's part of what I'm doing here. And you'll see we're not talking about Jesus a whole lot, right? So you might be thinking, well, what about telling people about God, the author of love? Why not preach Jesus, in secondary schools? Patty's shaking her head. So, we grew up in this kind of period, but in the 19th and 20th century, there was a movement in the U.S. to separate religious teaching from public education. So it goes way back into the 1800s. And in 1962 and 63, there were two Supreme Court rulings. One was Engel versus Vitale, and one was Abington School District versus Shemp. These rulings banned mandatory prayer and devotional Bible reading in public schools, established that schools could not promote or endorse any particular religion. So most of us, I think, grew up under that. Like, when I was in school, my teacher wasn't talking about God. So during most of my personal education, into my professional years as an educator, the statement separation of church and state was clearly understood in public education to mean that on public school campuses, and especially in the classroom, there would be no religious instruction except in comparative religion units and the Bible as literature. Did you ever have teachers that started telling you about Jesus? No. Probably not too much. That was the only way that we hear about the Bible. I was a history teacher for my first 11 years and mandated by the state framework to teach comparative religion units. So that was kind of a benefit. And even when I talked about Christianity in that context, so in the legal context, there were always some students who questioned my right to discuss it in class. Wait, you're not supposed to be talking about Christianity? They didn't ever complain when I talked about Islam or Buddhism. It was always, you're not supposed to be talking about this. There's so much dogma from all these years building up against churches that you're not supposed. They knew this. So I followed the law, even though, but I did use those opportunities when I was teaching about Christianity within the context of the framework to talk about what real Christianity was, not just how the book said it. I tried to bring to life what our faith really is. But early on, I made a decision that for me to continue to minister as a Christian in public schools, I would need to follow the law. I also believed and still believe that the classroom is a sacred space, and that when parents trust their children to the public school system, teachers' professional responsibility is to honor students and parents' trust by not using their position as platforms to push their own personal agendas, biases, philosophies. I saw that so much. We always hear about it with religion. You can't talk about it. But I watch teachers, with their biases in other areas, pushing their own politics or this or that too much. That bothered me. And I felt like we had a responsibility to parents to not do that, really. In 1984, it was called the Equal Access Act that really for the first time in a long time said, if you have like a Christian club on campus, or we have to let you have a Christian club because we're letting other people have clubs on campus. So it became legal to have a Christian club on campus as long as you did it, in between class time and all that sort of things. And again, some of that, even though there are these laws passed, it takes a while to trickle down, right? So that you actually can do it without everybody screaming. So I started a club, a Christian club at this first school, and a pastor would come in and we'd meet with kids, and it was going fine. But one of the teachers felt threatened by our club, and she asked for a meeting between myself, and the principal. And the main issue was that she had her own club, and her own philosophy at the time was a philosophy of inclusiveness, and it was specific to the LGB. It was just LGB back then, LGB community. And so she thought that, this Christian guy is going to teach stuff that's going to be anti-LGBT. So I convinced them that, no, really, we're just going to talk about Jesus and, his love for us. And so we're not going to be judging other people. And so I was able to continue doing it. And I actually was a Christian club advisor at McClatchy for a little while, and then at Kennedy also part of the time. But we did have a teacher at Kennedy that had been running a Christian club for a while who did it in my view, all the wrong way. She used her class to manipulate kids to come to her club. And she gave them incentives. She wasn't being fair. She caused a lot of problems. She ended up losing her job, but it took a long time. And she was really disliked by students. They would come to me and complain that how unfair she was. It was sad, but that's the reason why I didn't agree with that. So Lori and I went to Columbia in 95, came back in 97. I decided I wanted to be a counselor after that. So I went and got that degree and everything. And there were no jobs at Sac City, so I went to Elk Grove Unified. Had one of my worst years ever. I felt like there was kind of an anti-Christian flavor at the school I was at. And I did some things that I made some mistakes, but it was like there just was this vibe, a bad vibe for me. But I want to tell you one story from there that relates to the faith. I had to attend counselor meetings once a month, all the counselors in the district. And it was a pretty big district by that time. And so we'd meet together, but it was very liberal in terms of some of the issues of the day. So we're meeting, and one of the counselors was concerned about Christian educators in the district who might act or not support LGBT, it was LGBT by that time, causes. And so he came out publicly and he said this, and he stereotypically lumped all Christians together as haters in this public meeting and I was just shocked. So I listened to him, and I don't know if you've ever had this feeling but God started like putting a burden on my heart. I started to feel this heaviness in my chest, like I needed to say something. But of course I was new to the district. I was not comfortable. Hey, guess what? So it took a while, and eventually it was like there was so much pressure, I just had to speak, so I did. And I began by saying, I'm one of those Christians who you're speaking about. And then the room was quiet like a graveyard. And it was like, oh my gosh. It was very uncomfortable. I'm sure everyone like, what's going to happen right now? But it was really cool. I mean, all of a sudden, I just felt like God speak through me. And I was able to share about God's goodness. I was able to talk about what true Christianity is. Not the stereotype this person was referring, but who Jesus, It was just this amazing moment. It wasn't a moment I would have sought, but it's a moment that happened. And I kind of felt a lot like some of the disciples back in the day when they were thrust in front of, their enemy, and had to speak. And God said, hey, I'm just going to give you the words. You don't have to worry about what you're going to say. And that's kind of how it felt. I still remember the fear I had before I spoke. It was an intense fear. And then the relief and the glory I felt afterwards. So after the meeting, several of the counselors from other schools came up to me and thanked me for saying it, because it's like they were all feeling the same thing. The very person that spoke against Christianity came and apologized. So it was one of those high moments. I was in, I went from like scared out of my pants. I probably peed my pants. I don't know. To being just spiritually in the kind of high. I wasn't truthfully usually that courageous. So after that year, I went back to Sac City, and I counseled there. And by the way, as a counselor, we were academic, we were college and career, and we were social, emotional, personal. So we helped kids, with their classes and all that kind of basic stuff. Helped them graduate from high school. We helped them prepare for the next step, post-secondary. Sometimes it's like what classes they need to get into that school and when to test and all that piece. And then the other part was with their personal issues that interfered perhaps with their ability to be successful in school, because they're struggling with things at home. So I'm going to go a little different direction here. Public education at the crossroads of contemporary culture and socio-political. So one thing we know, public education is where everything that's going on in the world, it seems to filter right down into public education. So we become it becomes central, and kids are affected by all this stuff. And I was thinking, my first image I had of it was George Wallace standing in front of the University of Alabama. I wasn't going to let anybody in during the whole segregation or the integration movement. Or UC Berkeley protests in the 60s. And more lately, it's like Palestine, Black Lives Matter, trans rights, all these things show up in our schools. And then as a counselor, I'm telling you that because we have to deal with that. Like, how do we live in that space with kids that are getting excited and this and that? So things like cell phones became a major disruptor of education, and social media brought a new type of bullying, cyberbullying. That became a real big issue on our campus. Kids are, rumor mills. I mean, instead of it just me talking to you and you, all of a sudden it's just like that. And kids' lives are ruined. I mean, we had kids who had to leave the school because the severity of the bullying. We had girls that took nude pictures of themselves, sent it to boyfriends, and then they break up, and the boyfriend would expose them all over the campus to everybody. Just imagine going back to school in that situation. So stuff like that really changed, some of the dynamics in high schools. So as a Christian, here's where it came in. As a counselor or administrator in a public ed system, you have to decide ethically how to function with student morality and ed policies which may fly in contrast to your own Christian worldviews. So I'm living in this space like all the rest of us, and I have to go, okay, this is what the government tells me I'm supposed to do. This is what God tells me. How do I balance that in a public school system if I want to stay there? So I think of it a little bit of giving to Caesar what's Caesar's and God to what's God's. A couple verses that stood out was to me to help me in that one is Corinthians 5, where Paul says, "What business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? Are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside. Jesus says in John 12, I do not judge anyone who hears my words and does not keep them. I came not to judge the world, but to save the world. Our first response to a broken world should always be love. Jesus first defends the adulteress and then protects her. Jesus scandalously invites himself to Zacchaeus' house before Zacchaeus repents. Too often as Christians, we think our response to others' brokenness is to separate the sheep from the goats, stand in judgment of them. That's not our job. So that's kind of how I approach this. I decided, you know what, I'm going to shine the gifts of the Spirit, love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. I'm going to put on Christ even when I couldn't use his name. And I looked for opportunities as a counselor to shine the light of truth too. So love, yes, but also truth and wisdom where I could. And I had to pick my moments. Like for example, some men and women in high schools are living without sexual boundaries now. I mean, it's not the way it was when we were kids. So it wasn't unusual for me to have discussions with students that are gay, and we're having relationship issues, gay relationships or heterosexual. And I have pretty conservative views on marriage and everything. And sometimes I even had a chance to share those with kids and go, I was celibate until I was married. And they're like, what? Are you from a different planet? What are you talking about? And then I'd be like, here's why. And so, they're never hearing that. So I had a chance to share some of those kind of things. But my main advice, I decided to advise kids that are gay or straight the same way, which was slow things down. Get to know one another as friends first. Save the sexual part till later because it complicates your life a lot. And probably you're going to break up anyway, and you're going to end up, having trouble with your grades because you're going to be so. Why put your? So I tried to use like the same techniques for both and not judge the situation. And also in counseling, one of our main words is confidentiality. So we can't just share what's happening. So kids come in and see us, they won't talk to us if we didn't have this commitment, unless they were a danger to themselves, to someone else, or someone else was a danger to them. So, but that can be a problem too, because sometimes I felt like, I really need to tell the parents about this, but I can't, So a couple examples of that. One is, when I was doing my student counseling, I was in the Thomas district. I had a student that was in a sexual relationship. She was like 15 with an older person, an adult. It wasn't super old. It wasn't like he was, Bill Belichick or something like that. But anyway, it was against the law, and so I had to report it to CPS. And of course, she was not happy with me. So sometimes, doing our best for kids or loving them wasn't always appreciated. Another student, I remember specifically, she was pregnant. She came to talk to me. She's talking about having an abortion, not really pro-abortion. So I was telling, have you I always, when I had kids that were pregnant, I was always like, have you talked to your parents, Well, they're going to be upset. Well, you know what? Trust me. Generally, they're going to, align with you and help you. They might be a little mad at the beginning, but you need their help. You can't handle this by yourself. I kind of gave her that same advice. She didn't follow it. She went and got an abortion. And I remember when she came back, and I was just hurt, sad that she had done that. And here she is, like, she was really immature. She was not going to think of anybody but what's the easiest thing. And so it was hard for me to not tell a parent because I just knew she wasn't going to do the right thing. And she did. But I had a commitment to follow the law. Also, it was a time when I was at Kennedy where the trans movement was really picking up. So what started was a few kids, and it was not super complicated because we would just find they'd use a teacher bathroom instead of a male or female bathroom. They'd sometimes come to us because they were afraid to dress in PE, and so we'd find a place where they could do that. And so again, I just tended to treat them, love them, not be a judge, care for them, try to create a relationship, because most of them I found were very broken, very confused, and very at risk. And if I thought, if I can just be a person there for them, maybe there's an opportunity for me to, breathe into their life a little bit. So a lot of the kids too, the trans kids, they changed their name. you know, so like there were Ellen and now they're Eric, right? And so they tell their teacher, I want you to call me Eric. We would even put it in the computer. This is Eric now. Parents didn't know about it. So they're doing all this. Sometimes they're changing the way they look. They come to school, you know, put on some different stuff, be a different person, go home and be the regular person, right? But we weren't allowed. Even I'd be in meetings with parents and I'd be, is this Eric or, you know, which one is this person? It was confusing. But I still honored the rule there, and I just, you know, I didn't agree with it, but I honored it. I had a student, this was one of my most, one thing as a counselor is, you know, it's like being a doctor. After a while, it's like, oh, that's a cold, that's a cold, that's a cold. I mean, you get the same, and then every now and then you get like, wait, this is something different. So I had, you know, kids come in, and this is a freshman coming to see me for the very first time at the beginning of the school year. She comes and she says, you know, I really want to get a sex change. And I was trying to act like I wasn't shocked. You know, I've heard everything. You know, this is the, oh, yeah, of course. But of course I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to say? So I don't even know that she could at the time. I don't think now like a 14 or 15-year-old can get, maybe we allowed it then, I don't know. But anyway, I was trying to, my whole thing was, hey, why don't you wait? You know, this is, you're changing a lot during these years. Who knows what you want to do, you know. Interestingly enough, senior year, I'm meeting with this same girl, and I said, remember that? You came in and I'm like, where's that at? And she said, oh, you know, I've changed. And she was dressed like more femininely. She had a boyfriend. So it was amazing how, you know, just having that experience early on and then the person she was 4 years later. So thank God that she didn't get a sex change back when she was 15. Okay. So, but I'm bidding my time here. I know you guys like to ask questions, right? Does it matter? Yeah. I'll skip that part. So one of the things that happened in a public high school like the one I was at, there's a lot of anger, a lot of violence, and there's gang stuff going on. There's all kinds of stuff like that. Many of my students came from low-income and dysfunctional families. Most of our African-American young men had no father presence in their lives to guide them. And that's a literal statement. I'm sure if I said that publicly, people would be like, oh, you're a racist. It was the truth. I mean, it was a shock when I talked to an African boy who actually lived with both of his parents. It just was that unusual. So it's no wonder when they came to school, you know, they didn't have the structure, a lot of these guys. They lived with their grandparents and sometimes guardians, maybe just their mother. A lot of anger and frustration spilled out on campus. And we had more progressive laws happening. This is like 2010 on. And it translated into less restraint. Students acted out more, and we couldn't do anything really much. Students could verbally, and like right now, if you look at the ed code, if I'm a student, I could cuss out my teacher in class right to her face, and they can't suspend me for that. Because we just took away the power from educators, really, gave it to kids. And we couldn't touch kids anymore. So on our campus, we had like a roving group of students that would just walk around all day long. Nobody could make them go to class. And it was just the weirdest thing. And then George Floyd happened. And they took away our police. They said, you know, police, they're gonna just bring up more tension, so let's not have police on campus. So then not long after that, we had a lunchtime where we had like 7, 8, 9, 10 fights break out at the same time. It was like a riot. It was something I'd never seen before. It was frightening. All of us didn't feel safe. We had some kids that were chasing each other during the fight run into the counseling office. One kid put his fist through a door window. Blood all over the place. But the police wouldn't come, nobody would come until it all happened. We go, this is gonna happen, we could see it, but they wouldn't come. They were kind of mad, I think, that we had eliminated them from our school. And during that same time period, we had 2 adult women come onto our campus, go into a classroom, beat up a girl, mace one of our hall monitors in the face, and walk away without even getting arrested. So part of our job was helping to deal with these kind of kids before they kind of exploded. So, you know, try to build that relationship so you could create a calmer campus, which is a challenge. I had one student came to our school, and he was an ED student. And this means emotional disturbance. So it's a student whose emotions disrupt their ability to learn. So you think about, well, what does that look like? It can be pretty violent. So this guy, unfortunately, he was like Bob's size. I don't know how, but he was like 270 pounds, this huge guy. And he bragged about like how he knocked down a door at his last school. He'd been in non-public schools for a reason. Because so whenever a kid came from non-pub, because it costs the district a lot of money, puts you in this private situation. So anyway, one day, I had gotten to know him and we had this relationship. But one day he went off and he literally was walking around, going into classes and out, threatening people. It was like having a freight train running loose on your campus. He came into the counseling office and he's doing the same thing. He's threatening people. But luckily, because I knew him, we built a rapport. I was able to pull him into my office and calm him down, and it changed the event. Wow. So again, that's one of the things we did. Okay, here's one of my hardest truths, I would say. You had these kids that are living in these worlds that are so dysfunctional and broken, and you can't fix them. That's the hard part. So you go, okay, what can I give you? I don't have a pill or anything that I can just give you that's going to make this go away. So, but I knew that I could guide them in it. So I could help them, encouraging them, giving them hope for the future, even in the midst of their suffering, because I couldn't fix their parents and some of the stuff. Unless the abuse was really bad, then of course I had to call the police or CPS. So let me go ahead just a little bit here, and then I'm almost done. So there were times when I often would ask kids questions like this. Do you go to church? Do you have a faith at all? Do you believe in God? Especially if somebody died in their life, I might say, what do you think happens to people when they die? Mm-hmm. And I'd find ways to get clues to find out if they had any church Christian background. If they did, I'd say, well, do you believe in God then? Well, yeah, I believe in God. And then I could use that to tell them about the God that they believed in, even if they didn't know how much love God had for them, how special they were. Darrell Johnson says, the universe is not an accident. God has created us in his image with purpose. We have eternal value. That's the thing they didn't know, that they had eternal value. They were always told that they were nothing. They were just, a dust speck in the universe, right? And so, there were times when I got to push into that. And there were times when I had kids, it was like I was an ER doctor, only I was an ER counselor, where they were, on the edge of life and death. I mean, they were suicidal, and I was nervous for them. When I would go, I'm just going to cross over here, and just tell them about Jesus, and tell them about who he is, and that he cares for them and loves them, and there's reason to be alive. And so those were, special moments. Especially with the increase in depression, anxiety, and suicide ideation by students in these especially since the pandemic, it got worse and worse. A lot of kids were, socially anxious. So let me say this, and then I'm just about there. Praying, okay. I'd like to say I prayed for my students every day, and I did. My ministry mindset ebbed and flowed with my own faith journey, so sometimes I was more prayerful and sometimes I wasn't. But a lot of times I prayed for students as I walked on campus in the morning, because I needed to pray to God, give me the energy to kind of serve these kids. Because it took a lot, to give that much of your heart and so forth. So I prayed for that. I prayed with coworkers sometimes, so I haven't really talked about that, but there were a few other Christians on campus in these places, and some of us would bind together and pray. And then, let's see here. Oh, another thing. I had some Christian students, so sometimes along the way you'd find out this student was a Christian. He was in the Christian club or whatever. And I was able to come alongside them then as a Christian counselor and to help them through, even though they were adolescent Christians, they still had issues. I had one kid who was OCD, seriously obsessive compulsive, like disruptively serious. And he didn't even know it, but I started learning about what he was doing. I'm like, you've got OCD. I read about it. This is what's going on. He didn't know. So it was good for him to kind of see what was happening. He ended up going to Berkeley, going to getting a master's from University of Chicago. But then afterwards, I think he had some really difficult times with the OCD. So that was something that I was able to do over the years too, just meet Christians. Didn't always work out well. I was called a racist once. Here I am trying to love kids, and I'm a racist. One time I had a parent come in and she asked me if it was my job to discourage students. I'm like, oh my gosh. So it doesn't matter what you do, sometimes you're misunderstood, and sometimes I was. And then there was a situation where one of our teachers, this was like during Trump's first presidency, and there were a lot of people really tense about that. So she sent out an email to, she thought she was sending out to her little group of people on campus that were like-minded. Anyway, she sent it to the whole school, and it was this whole thing, because I'd commented about something, and it was attacking Dave Drotts as a Christian, and da-da-da, I don't remember all the details. It was very, unprofessional and rude and cruel. And she didn't mean it to go to the whole staff, but it did. So it was an interesting situation, because I'm like, well, what am I going to do with that? A lot of the staff emailed me and said, oh, I'm so sorry, Dave. But what ended up happening was really a beautiful thing, because God gave me this grace for her. Like, I didn't feel like I wanted revenge or hurt her or anything. I mostly wanted her to know about God's love. And so I was able to talk with her. So she apologized right away online. I mean, she knew she'd screwed up. She could lose her job probably. But later, she and I talked, and I just said, I want you to know, I forgive you. I still love you. God loves you. And I have I feel no grudge. It was one of those moments where it's a little bit like the one at the other district. I don't know, God just gave me grace. It wasn't like I was this great Christian, more that he just provided the grace I needed in that moment to love her. Truly feel that, not feel like I'm going to forgive you. But and then what's amazing is Lori and I were coming back from Europe. Are we going or coming? Going, just this summer. And she was there at the airport with a bunch of kids in her class. So she saw me, and we hugged and stuff. And I thought, I don't really know what she thinks of me now, but I have a feeling that she thinks a lot better of me and of God than she would have back then before that. So anyway, so that's kind of the experience I've had, and I'm sorry I'm a little long, but thank you for listening. It's a long listen. And yes, questions if you have any.
Did you ever not want to go to school?
I didn't really have a choice. It was my job. But certainly there were times that were hard, especially when I was at Elk Grove that year, because I felt like I was just being mistreated so much. You remember that was hard. Yes.
Okay,
I never felt like I was afraid though, like I was going to die, and I don't know if that's what you're referring to.
I'd be afraid. When the guy punched you in the face 2 times, what did you do?
I was kind of stunned. It didn't hurt as much as I thought it would. And I was just kind of like, oh, I can't believe he did that. And then a hall monitor came up and knew him. And so he's like, because I was like, do I need to grab this kid? And he's like, no, let him go. I know who he is. And then that's kind of how it played out.
Did you push him away with your hands or anything?
No, I think after he hit me, we just had a distance between us. So he didn't try to hit me more.
It's horrible not to be able to defend yourself.
Yeah, that was a surprise. I just got too close to him, and I didn't know him, and I don't know. And so it's kind of like getting close to a dog you don't know, and he bites you kind of, and like, oh, I didn't know he'd do that. That was a shock, because no other student ever hit me. So,
I have a question. How do you get your students? And I'll tell you where this is coming from is when my daughter was in 7th grade, I made an appointment with the school counselor to talk about it, and found out apparently one person was in charge of 2 middle schools.
All right, that happens.
And it's like, and so my daughter wasn't seeing her. I was the one who had asked for a consult. And it's just like, that's an awful lot of
kids.
So how long ago was that?
2014.
Okay. So there was a time when, there was a point where the union negotiated a contract for counselors at Sac City where we had to be 350 to 1 or less. Before that, I had 500 students most of the time, quite a long time. And so, you know, then if you're a counselor and they go, okay, we have this smaller middle school over here with 250, and this one, you're gonna be 50 at each one, or something like that. It wouldn't be the same now, because actually too, in middle schools, they used to not even, I think sometimes it was like 1,200 to 1. I mean, you could be at Sutter with 1,200 kids and have like 2 counselors or something. And then when they made this new contract with the counselors in the district, they made sure that the middle schools had the same ratio as the high schools. So it changed it quite a bit. But that would probably be after 2014. That's more like
But
2018.
so how did you get the students? How did they get referred to you? What was, I mean,
Oh,
did they
okay.
come on their own? Did they
Yeah,
come
great question.
through teachers?
Every way,
Whatever?
every way. At Kennedy, we had a system where they could actually come on and make an appointment with. So we had calendars and they were public, so kids could make appointments. So we had a lot of that. And then we had some, you know, parents could call in and make an appointment. So there were different access points to do that. And again, it's like every profession. You have people that are really good and people that are really bad. And so, you know, I try to tell people,